Welcome to the Real GI Doc Show. I'm your host, Dr. Fred Gandolfo, and I'm a board-certified gastroenterologist with a medical practice in New York. Today's episode is going to be about doctor's time, and I'm trying to answer the question, is your doctor's time worth anything anymore? So I promised that when I started this podcast, I'd talk about things in a real fashion. So instead of trying to sugarcoat everything, I wanted to give a little bit of the real world of gastroenterology, but also just medical practice and being a doctor in general. And that's kind of partially why it's called the Real GI Doc Show. We talk about some real cases, we talk about real medicine, but also I wanted to use this podcast as a forum to talk about real issues that doctors face and that patients face and all that. So the topic that I'm going to talk about with this episode, it might end up annoying some people. It might end up coming off as a whining, complaining episode, but it shouldn't be, because that's not the tone or that's not the intention that I want to have with this episode. And if I can't speak the truth on this podcast, then kind of what's the point of everyone listening to it, right? If I'm going to sugarcoat stuff and tell you everything's great and talk about diseases all day, what's the point? So we have to hear some of this real stuff as well. So the purpose of this is really just to shed some light on what happens behind the scenes in your doctor's office on a daily basis. And this is especially true in an office like mine, which is a private office. I have a pressure to keep patients happy, and you may not have the same problem at a large institution because large institutions just have other doctors in the institution feeding patients into the specialists. But when you're a private practitioner, I'm trying to provide good patient care, but I'm also trying to provide a good patient experience because nobody is feeding me patients automatically. I don't have a big institution throwing patients at me every day. So each patient, their satisfaction matters to me. And I think that's one of the good things about a private practice is that I'm in it to help the patient, but also to give them a good experience in the process. So I kind of care about the way my patients feel when they come here. When they have a good experience, I'm very happy, and I want everyone to have a great experience. And when they don't have a great experience, I get upset about that personally. I kind of take it a little bit personally. I mean, some of this stuff is work, and some of it is just my life as a private practitioner. This is kind of what I do the majority of my time. So it becomes it's part of my personal identity. But without further introduction, I want to talk about a case of a bad patient review that I recently received and how it got me thinking about how people value their doctor's time, or do people value their doctor's time, and how some of my patients value my time. And I want to emphasize the phrase some of my patients, because the vast majority of my patients are great and they're kind and they're respectful of my time and they're like normal individuals. But you can't make everyone happy, right? That's just the way it is. I should also state before I get into this that I have to be intentionally a little vague about the details of this case that I'm about to talk about, because this particular patient, she gave her entire name under her bad review, which I kind of respect because I like when people use their real names when they're going to leave a review, good or bad. I don't like those anonymous reviews that say bad things, because is that even a real patient? Who is that? Like, it's kind of cowardly, I guess, to leave an anonymous bad review. I do give her credit for not using an alias, but her using her real name does create a minefield of issues for me to discuss this case in a public forum, since I have certain laws that require me to keep the patient's privacy private, and that's the way it should be. So I can kind of only talk about the stuff that she put up on her review, because she put that under a public forum, but I can't really go into the nitty-gritty details of this case because of privacy laws. But we'll get the gist of things just from this discussion. So here's the case of the unhappy patient. So a 70-something-year-old lady came into the office with complaints of a sore throat. This was about 3 months ago or so. And we ended up doing an endoscopy to look into this thing. The endoscopy showed a diagnosis that could be responsible for a person having a sore throat, and the patient was recommended to start some medication which might treat this diagnosis, and she was invited back for a follow-up visit, which we typically would do routinely after a procedure to review biopsy results and talk about patient questions and kind of take the next steps. So she never made a follow-up visit appointment because she called us a few days later and asked if we would give the results over the phone. Now, normally, I don't like giving results of biopsies over the phone because typically a biopsy result, either it shows something and there's more questions about that, or there's treatment to discuss, or it doesn't show something major. And then there's more questions to talk about, like what do we do? What are the next steps? This test didn't show the answer, so how do we proceed further? What are your symptoms like? Etc. This is a whole follow-up visit. So she didn't want to come in for a follow-up visit. She gave a couple of reasons why she didn't want to come in. It was inconvenient, etc. And I decided that, fine, I will do this one over the phone. So we called her and played phone tag, as is typically the situation, where we call and leave a message, and then she calls back the next day, and then I'm not available, I'm seeing patients, or I'm doing procedures, or whatever it is, and then we leave a message, and it's back and forth phone tag, which eats into everyone's time and makes these little follow-up phone calls far less efficient than a 2-minute phone call could be. So eventually, I had my physician's assistant call her back during regular hours at a time where we can get in touch with her, and she gave her the results of the biopsies and talked about next steps, including the medicine that we talked about earlier that might treat the condition that was leading to the chief complaint. There was a phone call documented, and we discussed diet changes and lifestyle changes and basically an entire visit on the phone because that's what she wanted to do, and I was being nice, I should say. But despite all this, I guess she was still confused because she requested her biopsy results and brought them to her primary care doctor, who told her something totally different, which was not the correct interpretation of the biopsy results. The primary care doctor told her that she had some type of, quote, serious precancerous condition, end quote, which she doesn't. The biopsies actually were negative for a serious precancerous condition, or any precancerous condition for that matter. But someone put this idea in her head that she had some type of precancerous condition and that I didn't notify her about it and we didn't discuss it, and they recommended some medicine for her, which incidentally was the same medicine that I recommended that she didn't want to take, and now she's taking, and she thinks she's getting better. So her complaint was that the endoscopy caused the sore throat and that I did not inform her about the serious precancerous condition that she had and that we denied the whole thing. And she went online and put this up on a review site, which now everybody can see and makes the practice look bad. And these reviews, you know, most of them are good. There's always a few bad ones out there. You can't really please everybody. And I do take the bad ones seriously. I try to learn from them. And what I did was I called her when I saw the review, and I said, hey, I don't understand. This is not actually what happened in real life. You actually don't have this condition. I want to inform you that this is not like you're getting worked up about something that's not even there. And I could not seem to change her mind. She felt like I was lying to her, that we basically lied to her about the biopsies, and I don't know what the deal was, but she did not have a good feeling about yours truly. So she left the review there. I tried calling her primary just to say like, hey, these biopsy results actually did not show a precancerous condition, so maybe you should call the patient and let her know that there was a mistake made and that you must have misinterpreted the results or whatever happened. I don't know the story exactly, but the primary care doctor also did not get back to me after 3 phone calls and 3 messages with her secretary. So feeling no love, I decided to make a podcast episode out of it because at least something good and educational will come out of this great experience. And again, back to the online reviews. They're cool. I like them. You're always going to get some bad ones. That's just the nature of online reviews. And the bad ones make everyone realize that the good ones are actually true also. So it's one of those things that like I don't mind a bad review every once in a while. But what does kind of get me bothered is that this was something that like didn't really happen in reality. I mean, this is how she felt. Of course, I can't deny that. But the medical facts are like the opposite of the way she interpreted them in her head, and now she thinks she has some type of condition, and I lied to her about it and all these things, and that none of that happened. And this could have all been clarified if she came in for her follow-up. And I guess the phone call that we made was not clear enough, even though it was like a 10-minute phone call and discussed everything in detail. People need to take, people forget things. You need to take notes. I get that you can be confused. Who knows when you're catching a person on the phone, if they're really thinking or they're thinking about 10 other things. But when they come in for an appointment, at least you have their attention. And if there's a question, they can ask you and they can write things down and you can make things clear if they're not understanding them. And that's the point of a follow-up visit. It's not just that I'm lazy and I don't feel like making a phone call. The follow-up visit actually is very valuable and is part of the whole experience of coming in for a diagnostic test. So back to the point of this whole episode, and I don't want it to turn into a rant or a complaining session, which is very easy to occur and a little cathartic sometimes. But is your doctor's time worth anything? Let's look into it. I think it is, but I think it's becoming less and less so in the age of immediate gratification and everything being on the internet and available to everyone at all times. So let's say that I do about 30 procedures here in the office a week, and maybe a rough estimate is that about 2/3 of those people need a follow-up to review biopsies or next steps or whatever it is. And the rest of them are just like routine screening colonoscopies, and they don't have anything to talk about, or they have something that I just will send them a letter for, like, hey, you're due in 5 years for a colonoscopy. Here's your routine biopsy results. Those I just send a letter for. If there's anything major, I'll call them. But for the rest of the people who have like a diagnostic finding or a symptom to discuss, I typically like to bring them back in to go over everything. Let's say that I don't do that, and I gave every single person after their procedure a phone call. Well, that would be about 20 calls a week to talk about post-procedure findings and next steps. And if you figure out that these phone calls typically take about 10 minutes on average, some are super quick. Hey, everything's fine. Oh, you're feeling better. Great. Talk to me if you need me. Give me a call. But a lot of them are even longer than 10 minutes. Some of them are like 15-minute calls because there's all kinds of questions that come up. The patient has new questions to ask you that maybe they thought of in the meantime between their procedure and this phone call, which happens a week later. There's all kinds of, hey, by the way, questions. I'm having some unrelated problem that I didn't tell you about last time or that's new in the last week or two, and I just have to ask you about this, which basically is like an entire separate thing. Like I can't examine them again. I have to go through the whole history about some new problem on the phone. It's not really ideal for anybody. And that's also counting the phone tag hell that happens from these kind of post-procedure follow-ups. Typically, you call someone, no one answers their phone, you leave a message, everyone's getting telemarketer phone calls. I don't answer my phone half the time because of the same reason. I see an unknown number. And we call, and they call back, and we call, and they call back, and they call me back 5 minutes after I call them, but I'm already calling another patient, so I can't take the call, or I'm in with another patient. So it's a lot of phone tag nonsense goes on behind the scenes with these calls, and that's half the problem, is that like I don't mind making a 2-minute phone call to people here and there, but the nonsense that goes into the phone tag and the messages and the back and forth and the anxiety, my doctor's calling me, there's something wrong with me, what's going on? I need to talk to him right away. It's just not really the best way to have a practice run smoothly. So if you figure that each one of these phone calls takes about 10 minutes on average, and if I'm supposed to make about 20 of them per week, if I wanted to give every single person their results on the phone, that's about 200 minutes a week of phone calls, which is about 40 minutes a day if I'm doing it 5 days a week. So 40 minutes a day with phone calls just to follow up procedures. Like, is that really fair to your doctor? I'm doing these calls basically on my own time, after hours, between patients. This is time when I could be doing other things. I could be seeing a new patient. I can be completing a chart that would take me normally after hours time to complete. I could be doing numerous other things that would probably be beneficial to my other patients or to me getting out of the office before 9 o'clock at night. And instead, I'd be making 40 minutes of phone calls a day. Now, let's not forget that throughout the day, I make phone calls all the time anyway. And that's not just the post-procedure type phone calls. Throughout the day, we get random phone calls from patients that need callbacks for emergent things, such as they're having new abdominal pain or there's some new problem that needs to be addressed right away. I'm getting random results coming in from tests that I sent off a week or two ago, CAT scans, lab tests, things that need to be followed up that are more emergent. Like when you send someone for a CAT scan and it finds something serious, you have to call those people back pretty quickly. I'm not going to let that sit on my desk for, a week before I call that person back. And there's also these random phone calls that people call in with new problems, people that I haven't seen in, 8 months, a year, 2 years, calling in with new abdominal pain. I'm vomiting, I'm having this and that. And they want like a full visit on the phone that day. And those people, they have to make appointments. But if it's something that sounds really serious, I'm going to end up calling them back. So there's all these other random phone calls throughout the day that probably cost me about 30 to 45 minutes on the phone a day anyway. And that's not counting these potential post-procedure routine follow-up phone calls at the cost of about 40 minutes a day. So you can see how I can easily spend an hour and a half on the phone a day, calling people back all day. And that's like no way to spend my life. I just cannot do it. I don't think anybody can. Can anybody really spare an hour and a half on the phone every single day, 5 days a week, just talking to people? in addition to the normal stuff that you have to do for your job, the normal 60 to 70 hours a week that you put in just seeing patients and doing charts and rounding in the hospital, it doesn't seem to be a good solution to the problem. Not to mention the fact that everything being available all the time on the internet is not necessarily a great thing for us doctors. And I have mixed feelings on this because I think it is good to have your information available to you. I like transparency of information. That's one of the reasons why I do this whole podcast thing. I think I'm a very transparent person when it comes to sharing information. Here's your biopsy results. Go look it up on Google, but you have to be careful about what you read. And if you're not qualified to kind of tease out the nuances of what Google is going to tell you, it's very easy to go down the rabbit hole of everything is cancer and everything is terrible. And the problem is that everything's available to the patient as soon as it's available to the doctor. This is part of the law now. So as soon as something comes back to me from the lab, it's also available to the patient in the patient portal. So I often have patients calling about lab results and biopsy results that I haven't even seen yet because I'm not clicking the computer to refresh every 5 to 10 seconds. Sometimes stuff comes in and I haven't even seen it yet. And there's 3 messages that people have called 3 times already and they want to know the answer, or they want to know why this CAT scan shows whatever finding and I haven't even seen it yet. So these messages all take time as well. And it kind of clogs up the natural flow of me seeing something and calling the patient back myself. So these portal messages take time. When patients text me on the portal, it takes a while, and I don't mind that. I like that people can reach out to me and that I can get back to them at odd hours with answers to simple questions. That's really easy to do. I could do that from my computer when I'm drinking coffee. It doesn't create the whole phone tag dilemma, but lots of patients don't like to use the portal. They just don't want to give their email up. They don't want to use the portal to chat back and forth. And lots of patients do think that it's like a DM type thing, and they want to have a 20 message conversation back and forth with 100 questions. And that doesn't really work either. I mean, at a certain point, you have to just come in and make an appointment. So all these little things take up time as well, although the portal overall is a good way to communicate. There's also the anxiety that happens when you get a phone call from your doctor's office and they tell you have to make a follow-up appointment to review some test results, because now all of a sudden you think something's bad. And half the people that we call to review stuff, they want to do it on the phone because they say, please just have them call me back right away. I need to know the answer. I need to know what's going on right now. I'm nervous. And I get it. But at the same time, I can't call every single patient back with every single result. And if there is a serious result, my patients really have to trust that I'm going to call them back in a timely fashion. And I'm going to reach out to them directly and tell them there's some serious thing going on and not let my office give them an appointment 2 weeks in the future. So by making an appointment, it's a good way to balance the back and forth between getting your answer right away, but also getting all your questions answered and having a satisfactory understanding of what's going on. So in this case that I talked about to open up this whole discussion, if that patient came in for her follow-up appointment, which is what we tried to schedule, and what she refused to do because she felt like it was some waste of time for her, her questions would have been answered and the whole situation would not have happened, because she would have understood that she did not have a precancerous condition and that the medicine I gave her perhaps would have helped the original problem, which she blamed on the endoscopy, which doesn't make sense because those symptoms existed before the endoscopy and they haven't changed. They haven't changed because we never treated the problem that we found on the endoscopy. So all of that could have been at least discussed or teased out further in a follow-up visit, where a phone call didn't do it. And at the same time, I'm legally putting myself at a disadvantage. If people call in with complaints and questions and I'm triaging them and trying to treat them and give medical advice on the phone without doing a physical exam or lab work or anything else, it's a sticky situation for me as a doctor, because what if I missed something obvious? What if I didn't get a complete history on the phone and I missed something big and the patient ended up getting sick? Who's to blame for that? They're going to say I called my doctor and the doctor gave me the bad advice or whatever it is, and I ended up having some problem. It's a bad situation for me to be in. That's why lots of calls end up with, hey, come into the office and I'll check you out. Or if it's after hours, you're going to have to go to the ER and get that checked out. Because if it's bad enough to call me after hours, or if it's bad enough to call during the day with a, quote, emergency, then it might be bad enough to come in, or it might be bad enough to go to the ER for. How do I know that it's not an emergency? So at some point, you do have to come in and get the situation looked at. And that's not to say that if someone calls me with a quick question like, hey, can I take this medicine before breakfast? Or, oh, is this medicine better than that medicine? Or whatever the thing is. Hey, I have a rash from this medicine. Should I stop it? Those are all quick questions. I answer those right away. This is more like, hey, I haven't seen you at 8 months, but now I'm having new right lower quadrant pain and a fever. What do? I don't want to come into the office. I just want you to tell me what to do on the phone. And those calls are no good. They're no good for the doctor. They're no good for the patient. Lots of mistakes can get made that way. And I just don't like it. So when I'm asking the question of, is my time worth anything anymore? I like to look at other professionals and how they value their time or how society values their time. And when I think of this, I always think of lawyers. So if I call my lawyer because I have a, quote, quick question about some legal thing, and I talk to my lawyer for 15 minutes on the phone, she's going to send me a bill a couple of weeks later for that time on the phone. It's going to be probably broken down into 15-minute increments. And if she gets $500 an hour for her time, whether I go there and talk to her or make an appointment or make a phone call, I'm going to get a bill for that 15 minutes of time for about $125. That's just the way it is. Everyone accepts that when their lawyer sends them an email or their lawyer's paralegal draws up some documents for you to sign, you're going to get an itemized bill for all that stuff based on time, the time that it took to do this, the time that it took to do that. Because lawyers, their time is valued. Everyone knows that if you call your lawyer, you're going to get a bill. So when you call your doctor, you don't get a bill. You can call your doctor 25 times a week and you're not going to get a bill for it. You might not get all those calls answered, but we can't really bill you for this time. It's not allowable. So how come the lawyer's time is worth $125 per 15 minutes, but I'm expected to make these 10 to 15 minute phone calls all day long for free? It doesn't make any sense to me. But I don't want to focus on money here too much because remember, these calls that people want done on the phone, these phone visits they want, they're not done during my workday typically because there's just no time. There's patients to see, there's procedures to do, there's all kinds of fires to put out. These calls are often done after hours. So this is done on my own time. Everyone goes home for the day and everyone's done with work for the most part. And I'm here making phone calls from my desk for another hour or so at nighttime. This is time from my personal life. So it's not that I don't want the patients to get calls because I want to have them come in to make money from their office visits. Although that's great, that's not the reason. The reason is I'm giving away personal time after hours to do this, where most lawyers and other people who can charge for their time, they're doing this during business hours. That's part of their workday. The lawyer would be happy to get a call for 4 hours on the phone because they could just talk to you for 4 hours. That's part of their workday. Where with the doctor or with myself, there's always people coming in. There's too many people to kind of handle at one time. So you're always trying to squeeze everything in to the smallest amount of time possible because there's just more people waiting to come in. People are calling with problems. People have issues. The hospital's calling. There's a procedure that needs to be rescheduled. Whatever it is, time is always the problem. So these calls end up being made after hours on my own time. And even if I can charge a lot of money for them, I can't buy that time back. And then I think, what would I do with an extra like 40 to 60 minutes of time per day? So if I didn't make these follow-up phone calls like people expect, or I should say, if all my patients expect me to make these follow-up phone calls and I did them, I would be losing 40 to 60 minutes a day making these follow-up phone calls. And the patients don't get a great experience because they don't really get their questions answered and they maybe don't understand the whole situation on the phone, but also I'm losing this 40 to 60 minutes a day. So what can I do with that time? Well, I can get home, I can see my family earlier, I could see my kids. It's the difference between seeing your kids for dinner or not seeing your kids for dinner. It's the difference between getting an extra hour of sleep or seeing your spouse or taking care of yourself and going to the gym or working out, seeing friends. It's the difference between all those things. An extra hour a day really makes a big difference because at the end of the day, you spend so much time working, eating, sleeping, and doing all the have-to things that extra hour a day is like life-changing. If you can get an extra hour a day of your life of free time, it would be great. Maybe I see the kids for dinner more often. So each one of these little phone calls is not a big deal, right? It's only like 10 minutes here and there. But if I did this forever through my entire career, each one of these little phone calls chips away at my life just a little bit each time. And slowly and surely over the years, that's a lot of time that's lost to making these phone calls. And unfortunately, I feel like this is just a damned if you do, damned if you don't type thing, because either you give away your precious time to keep people happy and satisfied so they don't try to hurt your practice with negative reviews and other such vitriol, or you protect your personal time and then you're seen as just another cold, money-grubbing doctor who doesn't care. So it's kind of like a lose-lose situation. But getting back to that math equation, so 200 minutes a week, right? That's how many phone calls I would have to make if every patient wanted to be treated like our complaining patient here. So if I average that out to the year, That's about 10,000 minutes a year, which is about 166 hours per year. Now, if I spent all that extra time with my kids from the day they were born to the day they were 18 years old, that's like 3,000 hours throughout their lifetime. Imagine having 3,000 extra hours with your kids once they've grown up and they're gone to college or they're employed or they're moved out. That 3,000 extra hours would be a huge deal in your entire relationship with your children, getting to know them, being there for them. That's what it adds up to be. 40 minutes a day, that's what it adds up to be. So time is the one thing that no one has enough of and no one can get back. So please respect your doctor's time. I can already hear you saying that you just waited 45 minutes to see your last doctor. So respect goes both ways, Doc. And that's true. Something to talk about for sure on a future episode. How can doctors do better respecting their patients' time? But this episode has gone on long enough already, and I don't want to take up any more of your precious time. So that's the end of this show. I hope you enjoyed this little side note where we didn't talk about a patient case regarding their medical issues, and we did talk about more of what is going on with the doctor-patient relationship behind the scenes. If you enjoyed this episode, please go on social media and share it, comment on it, do whatever you want to do. You can find me at RealGIDoc, and you can also send an email or a voice memo to me using the link in the show notes if you have a question or a comment, and I'm happy to play it on a future episode and discuss it. Can you believe this is now our 19th episode of the show? Well, neither can I. These shows are kind of fun to make, but nobody will ever know about them unless you share them or comment on them or review them on Apple Podcasts. So the best way to do that is to go to your podcast player and scroll down and leave a review about the Real GI Doc Show. Those reviews help me reach other people who will find the podcast as a new suggestion and will help to get this out for more people to hear. As always, thank you for listening, and I will see you next time.
That's it for this episode of The Real GI Doc Show. Make sure to join Dr. Gandolfo next time to explore another interesting topic in gastrointestinal health. And remember, the views and opinions presented in today's episode are for informational and entertainment purposes only. Nothing discussed in this episode should be considered or used as a substitute for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. If you're experiencing a health issue, please consult with a doctor or a medical provider in your area. Thanks again for listening to the show.